Have you ever imagined what it would be like to live by the Sea of Galilee during the time of Jesus? Maybe you picture serene, calm waters, beautiful sunsets, and peaceful days. Well, I'm here to tell you, the reality was a whole lot tougher. In fact, most of us probably wouldn't last a single day. Let's peel back the layers of history and explore the real, gritty life on the shores of this famous lake. First, let's talk about the heat. The Sea of Galilee is in a deep valley, well below sea level. This creates a kind of natural greenhouse. In summer, temperatures soar, often hitting well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 Celsius. And the humidity? It's oppressive. Imagine working all day under that blistering sun with no air conditioning, no electric fans, not even a cold drink from the fridge. You're sweating constantly. The air is thick and heavy, and there's very little shade out on the water or along the shore. The heat alone would be a huge challenge for anyone not accustomed to it. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was draining, making every physical task 10 times harder. And with the heat and water come insects. Lots of them. The lakeside would have been buzzing with flies, mosquitoes, and other biting bugs, especially around the marshy areas, and of course, the fish markets. There were no insect repellents or screens on windows. At night, trying to sleep would have been a constant battle against whining mosquitoes. During the day, flies would be everywhere, especially where fish were being processed. It was an unavoidable and very annoying part of daily life that we rarely ever think about. Now, let's get to the heart of the local economy: fishing. The towns around the lake, like Capernaum and Bethsaida, were fishing hubs. But don't imagine a quaint little hobby. This was a tough, smelly, industrial business. The shorelines would have been lined with fish markets, and the smell would have been overpowering. Imagine the scent of fish guts, drying salt, and rotting leftovers baking under that intense sun all day. It's a smell that would cling to your clothes, your hair, everything. For the people who lived and worked there, it was the smell of money, the smell of survival. For us, it would be overwhelming. The markets would be noisy, chaotic places, with fishermen mending nets, merchants haggling, and workers gutting and salting fish for export. The work itself was backbreaking. Fishermen like Peter, Andrew, James, and John worked through the night, which was often the best time to catch fish. They used heavy, coarse nets made of linen, weighing them down with lead or stones. Imagine hauling these heavy, waterlogged nets into the boat, hour after hour, your muscles aching, your hands raw and calloused from the rough ropes. It was physically demanding labor that required immense strength and endurance. The boats they used weren't pleasure craft either. They were simple, open wooden boats, probably around 25 feet long. They were functional, not comfortable. You'd be exposed to the elements, sitting on rough wooden planks, rocking on the waves. There was no cabin to shelter in, no comfortable seating. Just you, your crew, the nets, and the fish. And then there are the storms. The Sea of Galilee is notorious for them. Because it's surrounded by hills and sits in a deep basin, powerful winds can suddenly sweep down from the Golan Heights with very little warning. These winds can whip the calm, glassy surface of the lake into a frenzy of violent waves in just a matter of minutes. One moment you're fishing under a starry sky, and the next you're fighting for your life in a terrifying storm. The disciples, seasoned fishermen, were terrified during the storm described in the Gospels, and for good reason. These were not minor squalls. They were life-threatening tempests that could easily capsize a small fishing boat, tossing everyone into the churning water. This constant danger was a fundamental part of a fisherman's life. Beyond the fishing industry, the Sea of Galilee was a major crossroads. The Via Maris, or the Way of the Sea, a major ancient trade route, passed right by it. This meant the area wasn't some isolated backwater. It was bustling with activity. You would have seen Roman soldiers marching, tax collectors like Matthew at their booths, and caravans of merchants from distant lands carrying spices, textiles, and other goods. This created a diverse, multilingual, and sometimes tense environment. While it brought economic opportunities, it also brought the heavy hand of Roman rule. The presence of soldiers and tax collectors was a constant reminder of who was in charge. So you have this mix of hardworking local fishermen and a constant flow of travelers, soldiers and officials from all over the empire. Let's think about the communities themselves. The houses in a town like Capernaum were simple structures, built very close together. They were typically made of the local black basalt rock, with thatched roofs of mud and straw. Families lived in small, often single-room dwellings, sharing their space with extended family. Privacy was a luxury most people didn't have. These homes were dark, with only small openings for windows to keep out the intense heat. At night, they'd be lit by small, smoky oil lamps. Imagine living in a crowded, dark space with your entire family, day in and day out. It fostered a strong sense of community, but it was a far cry from the personal space we value so much today. So, when we piece it all together, the relentless heat, the swarms of insects, the overpowering smell of the fish markets, the back-breaking labor, the sudden, violent storms, and the crowded living conditions, we get a much more realistic picture. Life by the Sea of Galilee was not a peaceful retreat. It was a tough, gritty, and demanding existence. The people who lived there were resilient, strong, and deeply connected to the challenges of their environment. Understanding this context makes the stories from this region even more powerful. When Jesus called fishermen to follow him, he wasn't calling people from an easy life. He was calling hardworking men who understood sacrifice, risk, and perseverance. When he calmed the storm, he wasn't just performing a miracle. He was intervening in a real, terrifying danger that these men faced regularly. The world of Jesus and his disciples was a world of sweat, calluses, and constant struggle. It was vibrant and full of life, but it was also incredibly hard. So next time you picture the Sea of Galilee, remember the real-life challenges behind the serene image. It gives you a whole new appreciation for the people who lived, worked, and walked along its shores 2,000 years ago. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical places you'd like to explore. See you next time. For most people, life was lived in small, bustling villages nestled along the shores of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee wasn't just a beautiful body of water. It was the lifeblood of the region. The villages that dotted its shoreline were epicenters of trade, culture, and daily life. Let's start with Capernaum. This was a significant town, often called Jesus' own town in the Gospels. It was a hub of activity. Imagine a place teeming with fishermen, tax collectors, farmers, and artisans. It was a border town situated on a major trade route, the Via Maris, or Way of the Sea. This meant it was a cosmopolitan place for its time. You'd hear different languages, see Roman soldiers, and witness goods from far-off lands being traded. People like Peter, Andrew, James, and John, the famous fishermen disciples, called this area home. So did Matthew, the tax collector, whose toll booth would have been a familiar, if not always popular, landmark. Life in Capernaum was centered around two main things: the synagogue and the sea. The synagogue wasn't just for worship. It was the community center, the school, and the court. It was where people gathered to discuss local issues, study the Torah, and connect with their neighbors. Archaeologists have uncovered the stunning remains of a later period synagogue built right on top of the one from Jesus' time. The sea, of course, was the economic engine. The fishing industry was huge. It wasn't just a guy with a rod and reel. It involved teams of men, large nets, and a whole support system of boat builders, net menders, and fish processors who would salt and dry the catch to be exported across the Roman Empire. Now let's journey a bit further up the coast to Bethsaida. The name itself means House of the Fisherman, which tells you everything you need to know about its primary industry. This was the hometown of Philip, Andrew, and Peter. Unlike the more developed Capernaum, Bethsaida was more of a rustic fishing village. Picture a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else's business. Families likely worked together, with fathers teaching their sons the art of casting nets and navigating the unpredictable waters of the Galilee. The daily rhythm would have been dictated by the movement of the fish. Men would go out at night when the fishing was best, and the village would come alive in the morning as they returned with their catch, ready to be sold at the local market or processed for export. And then there's Magdala, a name that immediately brings to mind Mary Magdalene. Magdala, also known as Tarikia, was famous for its fish salting industry. It was a prosperous, commercially driven town. Imagine the smell of salt and fish hanging in the air. This was a place of industry. Large vats would have been used for pickling and processing fish, which were then packed into amphorae, large clay jars, and shipped all over. The discovery of a first-century synagogue in Magdala was a groundbreaking find. It is one of the oldest ever discovered in Galilee and features a unique stone carved with a menorah, giving us an incredible snapshot of Jewish life and art right before the destruction of the Second Temple. Mary Magdalene came from this bustling, industrious town, and her name forever links her to this specific place and its thriving economy. So, we have these distinct but interconnected villages. But what were their homes like? Forget marble villas. The average person lived in a simple, functional dwelling. The primary building material was the local black basalt, a volcanic rock that is abundant in the region. It's hard, durable, and gives the ancient ruins their characteristic dark color. You can still see it everywhere when you visit these sites today. Homes were typically built around a central, unroofed courtyard. This courtyard was the heart of the home, a multi-purpose space where families cooked, worked, and socialized. It provided light and ventilation to the surrounding rooms. The rooms themselves were small and dark, with thick basalt walls that helped keep the house cool in the scorching summer heat and warm during the cooler, rainy winters. The construction was simple. Walls were made of unworked or roughly shaped basalt stones, held together with mud and smaller stones as mortar. Roofs were flat and made of wooden beams laid across the top of the walls. These beams were then covered with a layer of branches or reeds, and then a thick layer of packed earth or clay. This type of roof needed constant maintenance. After a heavy rain, it would need to be replastered and rolled to prevent leaks. You might remember the story from the Gospels, where a paralyzed man is lowered through the roof to see Jesus. This is the kind of roof they were digging through, a packed earth and thatch structure, not solid stone or tile. People also used their flat roofs as extra living space for sleeping on hot nights, drying laundry or produce, or just getting a bit of fresh air. Inside, the floors were typically beaten earth. Furnishings were minimal. People might have woven mats for sleeping, a few clay pots for cooking and storage, a grinding stone for making flour, and an oil lamp for light after dark. These were one-story homes, often clustered together in what archaeologists call insulae, or blocks of houses, with shared walls and narrow, winding alleyways in between. This close-quarters living meant that community life wasn't just an option. It was a necessity. This brings us to the rhythm of daily life. Life was communal to its core. Neighbors weren't strangers. They were an extended family you relied on for everything. The day started early, at sunrise. For a fishing family, the men might already be out on the lake, while the women would begin the day's chores. This involved grinding grain to make flour for the daily bread, a physically demanding task done every single day. They would also fetch water from the village well or spring, a central gathering spot and a place to catch up on all the local news. The community had various roles. Beyond the fishermen who formed the backbone of the economy, there were farmers who worked the fertile lands just beyond the village, growing wheat, barley, olives, and grapes. There were potters, weavers, carpenters, and stonemasons. Everyone had a part to play. The synagogue, as we mentioned, was the social and spiritual hub. The Sabbath was a day of rest that structured the entire week, a time for family, worship, and community gathering. Festivals and life events were also communal affairs. A wedding wasn't a private family event. It was a celebration for the entire village that could last for days. Funerals, too, were a shared experience of grief and support. This deep sense of community was the social safety net. In a world without insurance or government programs, you relied on your neighbors to help you rebuild after a fire, to support you during a bad harvest, or to care for you when you were sick. So when we picture the world of the Gospels, we shouldn't just think of Jesus walking alone on a dusty road. We should picture him entering these vibrant, noisy, and tightly knit villages. We should see him teaching in synagogues filled with curious locals, healing people in crowded courtyard homes, and calling his disciples from their boats and their daily work. These villages, Capernaum, Bethsaida, Magdala, were the stage upon which so much of this incredible story unfolded. They were real places, inhabited by real people, with lives full of hard work, deep faith, and an unbreakable sense of community. Understanding their world helps us understand the story in a much deeper, more human way. Imagine waking up before the sun even touches the horizon. The first sound you hear isn't the crowing of a rooster, but the rhythmic, grinding sound of stone on stone. This was the daily reality for countless women. Every single morning, they would take barley or wheat and begin the laborious process of grinding it into flour. This wasn't a quick task done with a modern machine. It was hours of physically demanding work, using a heavy hand mill to produce enough flour to bake bread for their entire family. This daily bread, the very staple of their diet, was born from the strength and perseverance of women. Without this fundamental work, families wouldn't have been fed, and the communities we read about couldn't have thrived. And it didn't stop with bread. The Sea of Galilee was, and still is, famous for its fish. We hear a lot about the fishermen, the apostles who left their nets to follow a new path. But who prepared that fish once it was brought ashore? Again, it was the women. Their hands were skilled in scaling, gutting, and cleaning the day's catch. They knew the best ways to salt and dry the fish to preserve it for leaner times, ensuring a stable food supply for their households. This wasn't just cooking. It was a crucial part of the local economy. The preserved fish could be traded or sold in the market, providing essential income. So, while the men were out on the water, the women were on the shore, transforming the raw catch into a valuable commodity that sustained their families and the entire region. Their work was the bridge between the sea and the table, between a fisherman's labor and a community's nourishment. Let's talk about fabric and nets, the very threads that held this society together. Weaving was a domain almost exclusively managed by women. From a young age, girls would learn to spin wool or flax into thread and then weave it into cloth on a loom. This cloth wasn't just for making simple tunics. It was used for everything clothing for every family member. Blankets for warmth, sacks for carrying goods, and even sails for the fishing boats. Each piece of fabric represented countless hours of patient, skilled labor. But their work with threads went even further, right back to the water's edge. The fishing nets, the primary tool for the region's main industry, were constantly in need of repair. The rocky shores and the sheer weight of a large catch could easily cause rips and tears. A damaged net meant no fish, and no fish meant no income. While the men might rest after a long night on the water, it was often the women who sat for hours, meticulously mending the nets, their fingers expertly tying knots and replacing broken sections. Their careful, precise work ensured that the primary engine of the Galilean economy could continue to run day after day. This wasn't just a domestic chore. It was essential maintenance for the community's most important industry. They were, in a very real sense, mending the livelihood of their entire society. When you put all these pieces together, the grinding of grain, the preparation of fish, the weaving of cloth, and the mending of nets, you start to see a powerful, yet often invisible, economic and social engine driven entirely by women. This wasn't just housework. This was the foundational labor that kept households functioning, communities fed, and the local economy afloat. It was a constant cyclical rhythm of work that started before sunrise and often ended long after sunset. While men's work was often public and visible out on the sea or in the marketplace, women's work was largely private, confined to the home or the courtyard. But its impact was felt everywhere. This tireless work also gave women a unique sphere of influence. The home was their domain, and within it, they were managers, educators, and the primary transmitters of culture and tradition. They were the ones who taught their children the stories, the prayers, and the social customs that defined their identity. They managed the household budget, making sure resources were stretched to meet the family's needs. In the courtyard, where women from different households would gather to work, they formed powerful social networks. Here, news was exchanged, advice was given, and support was offered. These spaces, filled with the sounds of work and conversation, were the true social centers of the community, where the social fabric was woven and rewoven every single day. Furthermore, women played a crucial spiritual role. They were responsible for maintaining the ritual purity of the home and preparing for religious festivals. Their daily acts of service, of providing food and clothing, were seen as acts of faith and devotion. In the Gospels, we see women as some of the most steadfast followers of Jesus. They supported his ministry, not just with their presence, but likely with their resources and their labor providing food, mending clothes, and offering hospitality. They were the ones who remained at the foot of the cross when many others had fled, and they were the first to witness the resurrection. Their strength and faithfulness, forged in a life of tireless service, made them central figures in the biggest story to ever come out of Galilee. So the next time you picture the Sea of Galilee, I hope you'll see more than just fishermen in boats. Picture the women on the shore, their hands dusty with flour, smelling of salt and fish, their fingers deftly mending a net. See the silent, steady strength that formed the bedrock of this ancient society. Their labor wasn't just hidden. It was foundational. They were the anchors of the family, the engines of the local economy, and the keepers of the cultural and spiritual flame. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is full of unsung heroes whose contributions, though quiet, were absolutely essential. The sea holds many secrets, and the story of the women of Galilee is one of the most important and inspiring ones we can uncover.